My name is Heather Conley. I direct our Europe, Russia, and Eurasia work here at CSIS. We are delighted today to have a focused conversation on Germany as a security and defense actor. It was just a few weeks ago on July 29th when the Trump administration announced a significant withdrawal of US forces from Germany, approximately a 30% reduction or about 11,900 forces. This decision really reawakened a broader conversation about the importance of Germany to NATO, US national security, as well as European security. So to be able to provide a better understanding of the centrality of Germany as far as a security and defense actor, we have two great colleagues that will help us understand Germany's defense modernization plans, its deployments, its role in NATO security and European security. The first colleague, who hasn't yet joined us, he's coming late because he had an important meeting that ran over a little bit, is Benedikt Zimmer, State Secretary of the Federal Ministry of Defense. State Secretary Zimmer is in charge of acquisition strategy for the German Defense Ministry, as well as cyber, information technology, and strategic planning. State Secretary Zimmer has a distinguished career in the Bundeswehr, serving in a variety of roles. He's also an armor officer and has served in Kosovo and KFOR forces. We're looking forward to having him arrive very shortly. And with us now is retired General Ben Hodges, Purging Chair in Strategic Studies at the Center for European Policy Analysis. General Hodges, prior to his retirement in 2018, was Commanding General of U.S. Army Europe from 2014 to 2017, and prior to that was Commander of NATO Allied Land Command in Izmir, Turkey. But before we begin, just want to note for our audience, we have a question and answer function. We really want to engage you in this conversation, and please send us your questions, your comments. I promise I will weave them into the discussion. And I know we have a lot to talk about. So as we sort of violate protocol a little bit, we can't turn to State Secretary Zimmer first. So I'm going to turn to you, General Hodges. What I want to begin with is a conversation about Germany's defense modernization. So much has been made about defense spending, that famous 2% of GDP on defense spending. Germany in 2020 spends about 1.38% of its defense spending. I wondered if you could reflect on Germany's modernization plans from an American perspective, what you saw when you were in Wiesbaden, and what you think is most important for Germany's defense modernization. But welcome, we're delighted that you are here.
Heather, thank you for the privilege. As an infantry officer, I'm accustomed to waiting on armor officers, so it's not, or clearing the way for the armor officers. So it's all right that the state secretary is not here yet. So a couple of points. First of all, of course, nobody in the Bundeswehr or any of the allies are happy with the level of defense investment in Germany, especially professional officers and soldiers that are in the Bundeswehr. They know how to do this. There has been a significant increase in defense investment. And of course, given the size of the German economy, even at 1.3%, the total is significant. But the modernization effort, I think the secretary could probably answer it better than me, but like all of us, it's not just about getting the system. There's a political component to it as well. Germany's part of the European Union, and so there are structures there and expectations about where do you procure from. So that's going to be a part of it. The most obvious example, of course, was choosing not to go with the F-35, but instead looking for another platform that they'll probably eventually build with the French. I think the readiness has got to be the top priority. I mean, that's the reason we all exist, or the militaries exist, is to be ready. And I think that the Bundeswehr is working hard under the leadership of General Zorn and General Laubenthal and General Rohrschneider, three of the best officers I've ever met, to reestablish the culture of readiness that we all kind of grew up with. It's not just about money or processes. It's also about a culture of readiness. And I think that they're probably getting better at that. It's focusing not just on specific missions to Afghanistan or Mali, but overall readiness. But I think they have a long way to go.
General, I want to pull out some comments that you very specifically made after the announcement of the U.S. Troop withdrawal from Germany. You were describing Germany's role as an essential platform. Some of you have even described it in some ways as an aircraft carrier for the U.S., that it's this multi-use platform. It's not necessarily, when you think about U.S. force posture, it's not about defending Germany per se, but it's the extraordinary utility that Germany provides U.S. forces, whether that's CENTCOM or AFRICOM. It's the location that matters. I wonder if I could pull you out on those comments a bit more.
So first of all, Germany is our most important ally in the world. I mean, Germany is the country that the United States should be working very hard to ensure that we are working in sync on all the big issues that matter. That doesn't mean we're going to agree with each other. That doesn't mean we're going to like it all the time. But in terms of real strategic thinking, Germany is probably the only country that can influence Kremlin behavior. It's probably the only country that could even influence the behavior of the Chinese Communist Party. I'm sure you saw an excellent op-ed today in New York Times by Thomas Friedman that talks about President Trump needs to learn to start speaking German. Because with all the challenges that we have and the lack of capacity that we have, we need to be teamed up with Germany. So that's first and foremost. I think the decision, the proposal to pull the 12,000 troops out of Germany, there's not one single American soldier or airman that's in Germany that's guarding Germany. Ironically, we have contract German security guarding all the American installations in Germany. The U.S. capabilities that are in Germany are there to carry out U.S. policy all over Europe and Africa, and to some extent in Eurasia and the Middle East. So I have to say I was extremely disappointed in this decision, because it was not the result of strategic analysis. It was obviously a political decision, and I will pause now.
Thank you, General Hodges. State Secretary Zimmer, welcome. Boy, talk about sliding from one thing to another. We are delighted to have you here with us today. We've already started our conversation and you've been warmly introduced. So if I may just immediately pose a question to you, or you may need to catch your breath a little bit as you do. We were just talking about Germany's defense modernization plans. You are in charge of the acquisition strategy. You've spent a bulk of your career in the ministry focused on acquisition and equipment purchases. I think our audience would be very interested to hear how Germany plans to modernize its defenses. General Hodges mentioned the aircraft modernization effort, but we would love to hear from you. But welcome. I know you're a bit late coming into this, so we're just going to toss you in and away we go. State Secretary, over to you.
First of all, thank you very much indeed for the chance to have that discussion. And to be honest, I was highly surprised. I haven't expected such a traffic condition as I faced currently. That was the reason why I was slightly late. So sorry for that. And whatever I was not able to catch up with, I tried to pick up within the next minutes. But coming back to your question, yes, it's right. We have a situation briefly to be described with the words 25 years of peace dividend. That meant at the end of the day, we lived 25 years from stock, 25 years with focusing, whenever we did procurement, focusing on missions abroad, and that it was. So having said that, you might imagine that there is a lot of things to do in order to bring the German armed forces forward into a situation we are happy with, and we can tell everybody that we are provided really good, provided for the future. Having said that, it's more than Air Force, to put that quite clear. So we have a lot of fields to cover with. starting at that case, due to the fact that we are land forces with the Navy, we need additional frigates, we do need definitely additional submarines, and we do need more capability as far as anti-submarine warfare is concerned, especially the airborne one. Looking at the Air Force, we have a wonderful aircraft in service called Tornado, aged 40 plus. Means, in other words, it's considerably difficult and extremely expensive to keep that system in a shape that we would like to keep it in that shape, especially focusing on the special capabilities of suppression of enemy air defense and others. So having said that, we do need a successor. I think you've been aware that we have decided to do that in a mixture between some aircrafts coming from the Eurofighter or Typhoon fleet and the others from the F-18. I think that's a good solution, and what we have to do now is pushing it forward in order to keep the timeline, because 2030, I'm fully convinced it doesn't make any sense to fly with a Tornado. As far as the land force is concerned, okay, land forces is always a mixture between, we have quite good material, not only talking about tanks, but also talking about other transport means, weaponry, that's fine. The point is we do need additional capabilities to a certain extent, and we have to increase our fleet of mechanized infantry fighting vehicles. That is one of the key issues within the next years. And definitely for all the equipment, especially soldiers of the first line, and that means the infantry guys, just as an example, do need in order to fulfill their missions properly. That as a short, brief description. Not to forget, by the way, digitization. And that is a topic I could fill the whole period you've given to me. So having said that, I'm happy to take every question running on that and waiting for you.
State Secretary, thank you so much. I mean, that is an exhaustive list of acquisition, both land, air, and naval capabilities. Do you have a prioritization plan, or is this you are moving out across all components of this? And I want to sort of drill down on two areas that you mentioned. Anti-submarine warfare. Clearly, the United States, in reconstituting the Second Fleet, views the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap and the Russian submarine activity, and particularly the increased military capabilities that we're seeing around the Kola Peninsula, as something of great concern to NATO. The UK and Norway with the P8s have certainly engaged in that. So is this a role for Germany potentially to play in keeping those sea lanes open, just on that question? And then my second question, and this is something I'd love General Hodges to jump in as well, electronic warfare. When NATO engaged in its exercise Trident Juncture in 2018, what we found was a lot of GPS jamming. And we have great superiority, but electronic warfare undercuts that. And I think you're absolutely right in pointing out we have a challenge with electronic warfare, digital capabilities. I'd love, State Secretary, for your comment on those two fronts, and then General Hodges would welcome your reflections as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. That is one of the wonderful questions to be honest, I do hate, because whenever you're asking for prioritization, it is always like looking if there is a chance not to bring something to life you need. And that is bad news. So having that you're right, we have a prioritization quite clear, and I think that's nothing new. First of all, personal equipment for soldiers. Secondly, digitization, digital battlefield, not this wonderful gold-framed thing, but to have the entrance, and then everybody's aware looking at the IT technology. It doesn't make any sense to have the whole armed forces equipped with one system. If you have succeeded in bringing that to life, it is outdated, and you have to rethink what you've decided years ago. So that doesn't make any sense. It's more spiral development than it is just focusing on one solution. And so from that perspective, that are the top priorities of our minister. And then you're right, yes, we have some gaps we have to fill. One is definitely the MPA, or the anti-submarine warfare, ASW. there is definitely a lot of things to do as far as the Air Force is concerned. That's not only with the fixed-wing aircraft manned, but as far as UAV is concerned as well. I think you are aware that we have introduced some years ago the project Eurodrone, and that will be the European step into somewhat like a drone system that is a little bit bigger, that can transport a lot of things, including using that system for special purposes on electronic warfare. That we shouldn't underestimate. That is not only Iraqi for that, it's always to be rethought. What could we do in order to jam, just as one example. And as far as GPS is concerned, yes, that's definitely a problem. It's not easy to generate problems in the GPS system, but obviously somebody is able to do so. So the question is what to do. Additional satellites, different systems, might be a totally different second system to be established in order to have at least reference. You can go for that. That are topics we have to consider, but that is not a point we have to consider as Germany alone. That's definitely a point we have to argue about in NATO framework. Not relying on America should solve that and we jump on the train. I'm quite sure we have to find a common solution. We have to think through that, and we have to make a decision rather sooner than later, at least to identify where we could enter a new train to prevent that chaos that could be generated whilst jamming GPS.
Thank you, State Secretary. General Hodges, would love your reflection and comment. Lots of priorities there as well. And on the electronic warfare, something I know you addressed while you were U.S. Army Europe Commanding General as well.
Thanks, Heather. Staatssekretary, greetings from Frankfurt. Nice to see you. Well, first of all, of course, for me, the #1 priority for all defense spending has to be on readiness. And I know that State Secretary Zimmer, as a former armor officer, recognizes that. But in the modernization effort, I wouldn't disagree. As an outsider looking in, he would know what the priorities are. But certainly we have learned so much from watching Russian forces in Ukraine, in Syria, and in Libya. The level of capability that they have demonstrated over and over of electronic warfare, the ability to jam, but also what's really concerning is their ability to find, to detect, and then to target. They are just as good as we are at connecting drones to rocket launchers. Ukrainians have paid a huge price whenever they were on a telephone or a radio that was not secure, or if they were caught in the open. So we've all had to learn how to hide again, both to hide physically as well as to hide your electronic signature, because for sure the Russians have the ability to find that. And this also means that we've got to be able to operate to be more interoperable in our communications. If the US does everything on SIPR, that's no good to anybody else. Or if the Germans, the Bundeswehr has a communication system that they can only talk to themselves, this is no good because of the way that we are all multinational task organized, such as the German-led Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group in Lithuania, or the Americans in Poland, and that's the way it's going to be from now on. And you have to show up ready to plug in. So the interoperability is important. Now, if I may, the State Secretary talked about digitalization, and I think that protection against cyber strike has got to be at the top of the list for all of us. And I'm not talking about just our headquarters that are out in the field. I'm talking about, frankly, the most important seaport in all of Europe is Bremerhaven for the United States. That's the place where all of our stuff is going to be coming into, along with others. And a cyber strike on Bremerhaven would be just as devastating as if 10 Iskander missiles landed on top of it. So we've got to make sure that airports, seaports, critical transportation infrastructure, the Deutsche Bahn, DB Cargo, are also protected. And frankly, that should count towards 2%. Lithuania is the leader here. Latvia has done it as well. And they've put all cyber protection under the Ministry of Defense for everything. And it counts towards their 2%. I think that would be a heck of an incentive if the cyber protection of Bremerhaven, for example, counted towards 2%.
General Hodges, you raised such an interesting point, and it's a great shift to talk about NATO-EU cooperation. Unfortunately, the pandemic cut it a bit short, but a very important exercise, Defender 2020, was to very much exercise and reinvigorate bringing forces, U.S. forces from continental U.S. Across Europe to get to the eastern flank. And of course, it's the commercial, it's the roads, it's the rails, it's how you do that through the ports, the security of the ports. We didn't really see that. State Secretary, the military mobility has been a very important part of the EU's defense capabilities. It's something that it looks like in the future multi-annual financial framework that we'll have some good investment dollars. Again, Germany is a logistics center of Europe. We cannot get to where we need to go, US or other NATO forces, without strong German leadership. The military command is in Germany. Help us understand your focus, both with your with the NATO hat and the EU hat on, and how we work more closely together. Hybrid warfare, gray zone, has to be fought with NATO and EU because of the civilian capabilities. We would welcome your thoughts on that.
There are a lot of topics, but I try to cover it briefly so that there are some questions allowed at the end. Starting with military mobility. At least old soldiers, Ben might remember, we were quite good in organizing all the traffic, all the military traffic through exercises, through reforger exercises, especially coming with United States forces to Germany during the Cold War era. At that time, we were settled well as far as administration was concerned. Then it stopped. Thanks God, we started in a peaceful time. At least we thought it would last to the end of every human life. I think we are all aware that that hasn't happened. And so we started to rethink military mobility, because every Bundesland, every region in Germany had generated different rules. And so we learned whenever we would like to pass through Germany with a transport, or in Germany from one region to the other, it lasted more than a fortnight in order to get all allowances for military traffic to pass through. That we succeeded in overcoming. So Defender 2020 was a good topic, but that's the only step. I'm fully aware of that. We just initiated the initial thoughts, but what we have to do is we have to become better as far as transport capacity is concerned, loading capacity is concerned with the railway. We have to become better, and that is for Europe, that's not only for Germany. We have to become better as far as the capability of the bridges is concerned. We have to be better as far as the organization is concerned, crossing from one nation, from one state to the other. So from Netherlands through Germany, through Poland, for example, to Lithuania. Having said that, there are a lot of things to do. European Union has identified that. That's one of the key issues we would like to push forward during our European presidency as Germany in lead. We are extremely keen on to keep an extremely close link to NATO. That's one issue. That's not an issue from the one side and the other side. We have to get harmonized it. At the end of the day, it's one issue we have to cover. So a lot of things to do, and a lot of flexibility we do need, and a lot of money. We are willing to put that forward in NATO with all the NATO states and with the European Union, but it's not a question of months. It's rather a question of years in order to become better in a way that we really will be able to cover that. As far as interoperability is concerned, but if you allow just that one point, I couldn't stress it better than Ben. I do remember as I was a young soldier, whenever I had an exercise with my British counterpart, at that time platoon leader as well, we exchanged whilst putting our heads together, because there was no chance to do this kind of radio from one point to the other, with the exception of fixed frequency. If you look at the situation currently in missions abroad, there is no chance, with the exception of using fixed frequencies. So we haven't stepped forward really. And interoperability as far as radio communication is concerned is definitely a big issue. Technological means does allow today much more than in the past, but we have to bring it into service. And that costs money, and that is a reason why I stress digitization. That is one of the fields with digitization I'm covering with that word as well. As far as capabilities are concerned and cyber threat is concerned, yeah, hopefully we come to a point in the future that nations are willing to exchange more than just that they've been threatened. We only can learn if we exchange details, not only details on what has happened, but also what did the respective side of the governmental side, of the industrial side, in order to counter that threat, that intrusion. From that perspective, I think we are on a good way, but whenever I'm stressing we are on a good way, it lasts. Not only with military mobility, but with the coordination and cooperation at the cyber side as well. And everybody, especially in the cyber side, is fully aware that we have to do much more than we did in the past.
General Hodges, I want to stay on that theme of military mobility, NATO-EU cooperation. I'd love your reflections on that, but I want to start shifting now to looking at Germany as a defense and security actor that deploys. Germany, of course, is the lead framework nation for Lithuania. And as we've seen over the last 2 weeks of historical events occurring in Belarus, the Lithuanian-Polish border now has become center stage of interest, certainly for NATO. I'd welcome your reflection both on how do we continue to send that strong message of deterrence, but also we're beginning to see a very dynamic situation where, you know, we don't want to have any missignaling or concerns. And so I just would welcome your views on both the NATO deterrence on the eastern flank and what we're seeing in Belarus today.
So, you know, the title of today's discussion, the centrality of Germany to European security and defense, is really a good one, because obviously when you look at the map, Germany sits in the middle of the map, unlike many years ago when West Germany was the frontline nation and you needed a Bundeswehr with 12 divisions and all the capability, the front line. And during that time, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Belgium, and UK were what we call the communication zone, the base, the rear area. Now the front line is literally 1,000 kilometers to the east, on the other side of Poland and Lithuania, up against Belarus, Ukraine, and of course the Black Sea. So for me, Germany's role, strategic role, is different. From a military standpoint, of course, you still need the highly trained, well-equipped, well-led Bundeswehr combat capability in all domains. But what we really need is this foundation for deployment, for command and control. That's why we have U.S. European Command and U.S. Africa Command sit in Stuttgart, U.S. Army Europe, in Wiesbaden, U.S. Air Force Europe, in Ramstein. It makes sense. All of our enablers are there. And the transportation network in Germany obviously is unsurpassed in Europe, but it requires investment as well. And this sort of a rear area has got to be protected. So air and missile defense. The United States has one Patriot battalion for all of Europe. That's one battalion. And that battalion will go to Ramstein on day one to protect Ramstein. So that means that Germany, along with, I think, the Netherlands, has got to pick up responsibility for protecting seaports and airports, critical infrastructure, and European citizens against what I think are inevitable missile strikes that will be coming in if deterrence ever fails. Now, Belarus, I was happy to see that the European Union leadership together has been pretty strong, frankly. Not as strong as I think what Lithuania and Poland would have wanted, But at least all the nations together have said that we don't recognize this election of President Lukashenko. And I believe that they have signaled to the Kremlin pretty strongly, you need to stay out, although I'm not sure that how much the Kremlin is deterred by that. I wish that the United States had been much stronger, much more clear than what we've seen so far. We need to get our ambassador into Belarus now. I think the administration was correct to attempt to normalize the relationship with Belarus here over the last 2 years, but we still don't have our ambassador there. I'd like to see that. I don't see NATO having a specific role with Belarus, except to make it crystal clear that we will defend our allies in Lithuania and Latvia and Poland, and that the Kremlin should not consider using this as an opportunity for any sort of mischief. I don't expect that. I mean, it wouldn't make sense. Last point is that the Baltic region actually is probably the most secure part of NATO's entire eastern flank. I mean, the way the Allies moved out so quickly, led by Germany with the first battle group, the geography works with the Baltic Sea. We can achieve sea control, I think, almost immediately. Kaliningrad is probably a liability for the Kremlin more than an asset. The Black Sea is different. The Russians have all the advantages there. The West has not responded strongly enough to their illegal annexation of Crimea, and we need to increase the priority and capability in the Black Sea region. They occupied 20% of Georgia. They illegally annexed Crimea. They're still killing Ukrainian soldiers in Donbass every week. They threaten Romania, and I think that's where we need to put more priority.
State Secretary, clearly Russia has really jumped to the agenda, certainly for the German EU presidency, and dealing with a variety of issues. Certainly Alexei Navalny having this very difficult conversation over Belarus. Help us understand from a Bundeswehr, Ministry of Defense perspective, how you are looking at Russia, not only in the eastern flank, but Syria, Libya. Germany, as part of the EU Operation Irini, has just sent naval forces into the Mediterranean to prevent, violations of an arms embargo to Libya. You're very well postured. You're deployed in dealing with Russia in a variety of areas. Help us understand where the Bundeswehr comes out on Russia.
If you allow me to start with the more simple part of that answer, picking up what when stressed in the perfect way, at the end of the day, whatever might threaten the Baltic states, we can cover best as NATO if we go for having forces over there and sending the clear message that worked during the Iron Curtain as well. Whenever one of the nations might be attacked, it does not hit only the attacked nation, but also the allies being in that region represented by own forces. That's a quite simple story, and that, from my perspective, is a clear sign that we've sent to everybody who might or was not, but might be interested in order to influence that militarily. What we shouldn't forget is it's not only a threat on military issues. The word cyber was mentioned, and the cyber issue is not really identifiable and clearly directable into one region or against one actor. It's not really clear. Was it a country? Was it a nation? Was it a simple civil hacker? And as long as you cannot identify that, it's considerably difficult to blame somebody in the word of an official writing. Having said that, it will not be that simple with a cyber threat. I fear will be much bigger than a military threat. Looking at the region in the southern area, talking about Mediterranean, Mediterranean is to a certain extent currently a powder box. We have the struggle between Greece and Turkey on resources. We have failed state called Syria. We have a problem in Lebanon, and that is politically correct. You could stress that differently as well. And we have definitely a problem in Lebanon, and we have definitely a problem in Libya with 2 actors, and the third is coming in. Talking about Russia is in, Turkey is in, and Egypt is considering what could they do if it comes too close to the Egyptian border. So from that perspective, I'm happy that we are focusing a little bit more on Libya with the Berlin process. I'm extremely happy that the United States decided to push forward, at least to support politically. It will be not really simple. You might have been aware that we've sent a frigate to observe the embargo as well. It will last a long time, and to find a solution on Libya will be extremely difficult. Switching back to the other regions, I mentioned Syria and Lebanon. To be honest, I cannot give you a prognosis of what has happened. The only thing what I've learned is it is extremely difficult to set the scene properly for the population over there and for somewhat like a stable environment. And talking about capabilities of Russian forces, yes, it was really impressive what they did. And we learned a lot out of that. The question is, will they be able to do that en masse, or is it just checking what they have developed and produced in order to generate that? Not to diving into deepest details, but obviously the capability increase is obvious, and we have to counter that. Not only word by word. So it does not mean every system for air defense, ground-based air defense, must be introduced in the same number as rocket systems are established on the other side. That won't work. It would overstretch the 2 sides. But to find a clever answer, and sometimes a clever answer might even be to use own cyber means in order to prevent that the rocket flies. I do know that is a tricky field as far as the legal aspects are concerned, but at least we have to consider to do so, because an attacker who's not able to attack is the best attacker.
State Secretary, thank you so much. We have gotten a number of really fantastic questions. I can't get to them all, but I want to group a few of them. And General Hodges, with your permission, they were very targeted to the State Secretary, so I may direct them, but I want to come back to for a final concluding word. And State Secretary, I know you had walked us through a little bit, but there's so much interest in this decision, both from an acquisition and a political standpoint, and that is your decision of modernizing your fighter aircraft. To sort of walk through that decision in your acquisition, both the Eurofighter and the F-18 decision. But again, this is going to be a decision likely for the next government, I would assume. We know the politics of this are very tricky. So I think our audience would be very keen to hear your words on that. And then General Hodges and I spoke about this before you came in. Obviously, the U.S. troop withdrawal decision is a sovereign decision by the United States, and we discussed the implications of that for U.S. Positioning. But some are questioning, has this created a real rupture in the relationship, and would really welcome your thoughts of that, understanding that it is the U.S. decision to do this, but really speaking to the bilateral relationship, the historic relationship, the relationship very much that General Hodges lives and breathes as his entire career, if you will. And then after that, General Hodges, I'll let you have a closing thought. So 2 very easy questions. Secretary Zimmer.
If you say so, I will not argue against. But I think I can try to make a long story short as far as the aircraft successor decision is concerned. Yes, you're totally right. The decision will be made within the framework of the next parliament. The election will be next year, and then there will be a parliamentary decision in 2022. Hopefully, the earlier it is, the better it is, because otherwise we cannot keep the timeline in a proper shape. That is totally right. Means, in other words, it is more or less the reason, or it is reasoned due to the fact that we have to provide our decisions on procurement, if it is more worth than 25 million euro, through the parliament and through the budget committee. That's quite normal. And that decision I only can provide if I'm able to forward a contract. So to have a letter of acceptance in the middle of 2021 is a quite ambitious game as far as the timeline is concerned. So having said that, it's the nature of that decision that we have to forward that to the next parliament. If it will happen, if they agree upon, we will learn. To be honest, I do not have the crystal ball. I think in Germany, we learned within the last years that security is more than we expected 6 or 7 years ago, starting with the Crimean War. So from that perspective, I'm an optimist that it will run due to the fact that there is a necessity to do so. So from that perspective, that works. Second point I missed, sorry for that. You did the second question. I've forgotten to read.
No, it's really, I'd almost ask for your personal reflections, to be honest with you, about the U.S. announcement of withdrawal of U.S. forces. Yeah, of course.
No problem at that point. I think everybody who followed the line of the media reports is fully aware that we identified that there's a decision of the US government, and that's definitely a decision of the US government. Nobody in Germany will argue against that. What we have learned, it is extremely helpful that we have agreed upon whenever there is a decision close to a realization, we will keep close contact in order to argue not how to do that, but just to learn the time frame, the next steps, in order to provide that to the different Bundesländer, in order to be in a talking round that allows us to understand what will go next, what will come next. That is the most pivotal thing. From my perspective, I think everybody is quite clear. The whole administration I talked through, the whole administration, other German administrators talked through, were exactly running into the same direction. We keep into close contact. Let's discuss about the time frame. Let's discuss about what is coming next. Once again, to repeat myself, not in order to change any decision of the United States government. That's a decision of the United States government, but to be aware and to get coordinated work into life in Germany as far as the postponement or the withdrawal is concerned.
Thank you, State Secretary. General Hodges, we'll give you those closing remarks. As you said, the discussion topic was the centrality of Germany. As I mentioned, your career has been involved in so many ways of either being based in Germany or using Germany as that essential platform for operations, whether that's in Iraq or elsewhere. Offer your personal reflections on the centrality of this relationship.
So as I said at the beginning, Germany is our most important ally. It doesn't always feel like it. And it's important to keep in mind, this is not an emotional thing. When we're talking about allies, we're talking about strategic analysis. What country do we need more than any other to help us with all of our challenges? And from a geographical standpoint, an economic standpoint, a military standpoint, and also the moral authority that Germany has earned over the past 75 years. I mean, the brand made in Germany, everybody respects it. Even if you don't like Germany, you respect. And I think it's time for a serious strategic debate inside German society about how Germans see their strategic role. I know the State Secretary sees this, but here where I am in Frankfurt, most people don't think about threats. They don't. It doesn't occur to them, or you get guilt, history put in your face. There's a reluctance to lead. And I think that Germany is mature enough, and Europe needs Germany to be the leader. All the problems that you listed, Heather, Belarus, Greece and Turkey, the Kremlin, China, Iran, Libya, with German leadership in helping keep the EU focused on what needs to be done. That's essential. And so the United States has got to work harder. Whilst we can still have huge arguments, like great friends do, about issues, about trade or defense investment. But I hope that we can make sure we don't cause long-term damage to this strategically vital relationship for both of us. Not Germany has a responsibility also. This is not a, and things didn't start turning a little bit sour with the arrival of President Trump. There were already issues happening before that. So we've got to do some relationship maintenance. I think it's fortunate for all of us that Germany now has the presidency of the Council of Europe, of the Council of the European Union for a period of time to help fix military mobility. Now that's a boring subject unless you have a crisis brewing, and then you've got to move stuff or people cross borders hundreds of kilometers in a hurry. This is a big deal. It's a part of deterrence. This mobility is what gives our civilian leaders options other than a liberation campaign somewhere in Europe. And so I hope that Germany will be able to use its leadership role for the next several months to kind of move that along as well. Thank you.
Thank you, General Hodges. I've never understood why we call it burden sharing. I've always said it's shared responsibility, it's shared security. Clearly, Germany has a vital role to play in supporting that shared security. Germany will lead, but it will lead on its own terms. But I think the State Secretary has outlined a very ambitious acquisition strategy, which speaks in some ways to where the challenges lie. There's been a lack of kit, there's been a lack of focus, but I'm hearing a very clear and prioritized approach. Tragically, the issue sets, the security challenges that we're all facing, I just hope our timelines work together, because the time it takes to do these long, difficult procurements and acquisitions, unfortunately, the adversary has their own timeline. So with that, I think we have answered our question. Germany is central to European and transatlantic security and defense. And we thank the State Secretary for hitting traffic, which I thought was a little lighter during these COVID-19 days, but clearly maybe we're coming back a little bit more in Washington. And we sort of flopped roles. General Hodges from Frankfurt, who's is spending his evening hours with us today. We thank you both for a really important conversation. And I think we have a great deal more of time for discussion. These issues are so important. Germany's role is so important. So I thank our audience. You sent amazing questions. I couldn't get to them all, but I hope they were reflected in our conversation. Thank you to you both. For our listeners, be safe and well, and we look forward to our next event. Thank you so much, and have a great day and evening.